The rain tapped against the hospital window like an unwelcome visitor, each drop carrying the weight of unspoken fears. Kate sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her fingers wrapped around a cold cup of coffee that had long since lost its warmth. The fluorescent lights above buzzed with an annoying persistence, casting harsh shadows across her pale face. She had been sitting in this same spot for nearly 18 hours, watching the steady rise and fall of her 8-year-old daughter Emma's chest through the glass partition of the intensive care unit. William approached quietly, his footsteps muffled by the sterile hospital flooring. He had driven through the night from 3 states away, abandoning an important business meeting the moment he received Kate's trembling phone call. Their divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, but seeing her now, hunched over in despair, made all their past arguments seem trivial and meaningless. The woman he had once loved with every fiber of his being looked fragile, like a piece of delicate glass that might shatter at the slightest touch. He settled into the chair beside her without a word, studying her profile in the dim light. Kate's usually vibrant brown hair hung limp around her shoulders, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She hadn't noticed his arrival, too lost in her vigil over their daughter. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the mechanical sounds of life support machines and the distant murmur of medical staff going about their rounds. Emma had collapsed during soccer practice, her small body seizing on the grass field while her teammates watched in horror. The ambulance ride had been a blur of sirens and medical terminology that Kate couldn't understand. Words like cerebral hemorrhage and emergency surgery had bounced around her head like pinballs, each one hitting with devastating impact. The doctor spoke in measured tones about pressure on the brain and the need for immediate intervention, but all Kate could focus on was her daughter's still form on the gurney. William finally reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly before gently touching Kate's shoulder. She startled, turning to find his familiar green eyes filled with the same anguish that consumed her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two parents united in their terror for their child's life. The petty resentments and bitter words from their divorce proceedings seemed to evaporate in the face of this overwhelming crisis. "How long has she been in surgery?" William asked softly, his voice hoarse from the long drive and the cigarettes he had nervously smoked during gas station stops. Kate glanced at the large clock on the wall, its hands moving with cruel precision. 6 hours, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient hospital noise. They said it could take 8 to 10 hours total. The bleeding was extensive and they needed to relieve the pressure on her brain. William felt his chest tighten at the clinical description of his daughter's condition. Emma, who just last month had lost her first tooth and proudly displayed the gap in her smile during their weekend visit. Emma, who collected butterflies in her imagination and believed that dandelions were magical wishing flowers. Now she lay on an operating table while strangers worked to save her life. The waiting room gradually filled and emptied with other families facing their own medical crises. An elderly man paced while his wife underwent heart surgery. A young couple held hands tightly as they waited for news about their premature baby. Each story of human suffering seemed to amplify Kate's own pain, reminding her that tragedy struck without warning or preference. Kate's mother had offered to come, but Kate had insisted she stay home with Kate's younger son, Michael. The 7-year-old didn't fully understand why his sister had been taken away in an ambulance, and Kate wanted to protect him from the stark reality of hospital corridors and the possibility of loss. William's parents lived overseas and wouldn't be able to arrive for several days, leaving the former couple to navigate this nightmare alone together. As the hours crawled by, they found themselves sharing memories of Emma's early years. William remembered the night she was born, how tiny and perfect she had seemed in his large hands. Kate recalled Emma's first steps, taken between her parents as they sat on the living room floor, both of them cheering and crying simultaneously. These precious moments felt both comforting and heartbreaking, reminders of happier times when their family had been whole, and their biggest worry was whether Emma would sleep through the night. The hospital staff moved around them with practiced efficiency, their faces professionally composed but kind. Nurses offered fresh coffee and small kindnesses, understanding that waiting was often the hardest part of any medical crisis. A chaplain stopped by, offering spiritual comfort that Kate politely declined, though she appreciated the gesture. Faith felt complicated when your child's life hung in the balance. William bought sandwiches from the cafeteria, though neither of them could manage more than a few bites. Food seemed irrelevant when every nerve was focused on the operating room doors, waiting for the surgeon to emerge with news. They took turns walking the corridors, stretching legs that had grown stiff from hours of sitting, but neither ventured far from their post. As evening approached, Kate finally allowed herself to lean against William's shoulder, exhaustion overriding the awkwardness of their complicated relationship. He wrapped his arm around her carefully, offering what comfort he could. Despite everything that had gone wrong between them, she was still the mother of his children, and her pain cut through him like a physical wound. They sat together in the gathering dusk, two people who had once promised to love each other forever, now bound together by something deeper than romantic love, the fierce, protective instinct of parents facing the possible loss of their child. The rain continued its relentless rhythm against the windows, and somewhere in the depths of the hospital, their daughter fought for her life while they waited, hoping and trying to prepare themselves for whatever news the morning might bring. Dawn broke with an almost offensive brightness, streaming through the hospital windows as if the world hadn't stopped turning during the longest night of Kate and William's lives. The surgical waiting room had taken on a different character in the early morning light, revealing details that the dim evening lighting had mercifully hidden: the worn fabric on the chairs, the scuff marks on the linoleum floor, the water stains on the ceiling tiles that spoke of countless other vigils like theirs. Dr. Sarah Martinez emerged from the surgical wing at exactly 7:32 in the morning, her scrub still damp with perspiration and her surgical cap slightly askew. Kate and William rose simultaneously, their bodies moving with the desperate urgency of parents seeking news about their child. The surgeon's face was carefully neutral, a practiced expression that revealed nothing of the news she carried. Kate felt her knees threaten to buckle, and William instinctively reached out to steady her. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," Dr. Martinez began, her voice steady and professional. "We were able to stop the bleeding and relieve the pressure on Emma's brain. However, she's not out of danger yet. The next 72 hours will be critical in determining the extent of any neurological damage." The words hit Kate like physical blows. Neurological damage. The phrase conjured images of a future she couldn't bear to contemplate. Her vibrant, energetic daughter reduced to a shell of her former self. William felt the blood drain from his face as he processed the implications. Emma might survive, but at what cost? Would she still be the little girl who narrated elaborate stories to her stuffed animals and insisted on wearing mismatched socks because they were more interesting? Dr. Martinez continued with clinical precision, explaining the various monitoring devices that would track Emma's brain activity, the medications that would help reduce swelling, and the gradual process of bringing her out of the medically induced coma. Kate found herself nodding along, as if she understood the complex medical terminology, but in reality, her mind could only focus on one thing: seeing her daughter. The intensive care unit was a forest of machines and monitors, each one beeping and humming with electronic life. Emma lay in the center of it all, looking impossibly small beneath the white hospital sheets. Her head was wrapped in bandages and tubes snaked from her tiny body to various machines. The sight of her daughter so still and helpless sent Kate into a sobbing fit that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. William stood frozen in the doorway, unable to reconcile this fragile figure with the energetic child who had climbed onto his shoulders just weeks ago, demanding he pretend to be a horse. The machines breathed for her, monitored her heartbeat, tracked every vital sign with digital precision. It was both miraculous and terrifying, this intersection of human fragility and medical technology. The ICU nurse, a middle-aged woman named Patricia with kind eyes and gentle hands, showed them how to properly sanitize before approaching Emma's bedside. She explained each machine's purpose with patience, understanding that knowledge could sometimes provide a small measure of comfort to desperate parents. The ventilator helped Emma breathe while her body focused on healing. The IV delivered medications and nutrients. The monitors tracked brain activity, looking for signs of improvement or cause for concern. Kate pulled a chair close to Emma's bedside and took her daughter's small hand in both of hers. The skin felt warm, which she took as an encouraging sign, though she knew it might simply be the result of the heated blankets. She began talking to Emma in a soft, steady voice, sharing memories of their summer vacation, describing the new books she had bought for Emma's collection, telling her about the butterfly that had landed on their kitchen window yesterday morning. William found himself unable to sit still, pacing the small space around Emma's bed like a caged animal. Every few minutes he would study the monitors as if he could will the numbers to improve through sheer concentration. The steady beep of the heart monitor became a metronome for his anxiety, each sound a reminder that his daughter's life was being measured in electronic pulses. The first day in the ICU established a routine that would govern their lives for the foreseeable future. Kate rarely left Emma's side, taking only brief breaks for bathroom visits and the occasional walk to stretch her legs when William insisted. She had called her job to request indefinite leave, and her boss, a mother herself, had immediately granted it without question. William had postponed all his business commitments, delegating responsibilities to his assistant, and canceling meetings that had once seemed critically important. They took turns reading to Emma from her favorite books, maintaining a constant stream of familiar voices and beloved stories. Kate read from Charlotte's Web, Emma's current favorite, while William opted for poetry, remembering how Emma had giggled at the silly rhymes in Shel Silverstein's collections. They played her favorite songs on William's phone, keeping the volume low to avoid disturbing other patients, but hoping that familiar melodies might reach her wherever she was in her medically induced sleep. The medical staff rotated through with professional efficiency, checking vital signs, adjusting medications, and providing updates that seemed to change little from hour to hour. Dr. Martinez visited twice daily, her assessments carefully optimistic but realistic. The brain, she explained, was remarkably resilient in children, but also unpredictable. They would know more when they began reducing the sedation, and Emma started showing signs of consciousness. Kate's sister arrived from Denver, bringing changes of clothes and homemade soup that Kate couldn't bring herself to eat. Friends from Emma's school sent cards and flowers, transforming the sterile ICU room into a garden of hope and support. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, visited with a poster signed by all of Emma's classmates, each message written in careful second-grade handwriting, expressing love and encouragement in the pure, honest way that only children could manage. The nights were the hardest. The ICU never truly slept, but it took on a different quality after visiting hours ended and the hallways grew quiet. Kate would doze fitfully in the chair beside Emma's bed, starting awake at every change in the rhythm of the machines. William had gotten a room at a nearby hotel, but he rarely used it, preferring to sleep in the family lounge when exhaustion finally overcame his need to stand guard. On the second day, a social worker named Janet stopped by to discuss practical matters, insurance coverage, family support systems, and the potential need for extended rehabilitation services. The conversation forced Kate and William to confront realities they weren't ready to face. What if Emma needed months of therapy? What if she required special care for the rest of her life? How would they coordinate her needs across their divided household? These questions hung in the air between them, unspoken but ever present. Their divorce had been acrimonious, filled with arguments about custody schedules and financial responsibilities. Now, faced with their daughter's uncertain future, those disputes seemed petty and insignificant. They found themselves working together with a coordination that surprised them both, taking shifts at Emma's bedside, making medical decisions jointly, and supporting each other through the darkest moments of helpless waiting. The third day brought subtle changes that only parents attuned to their child's every breath would notice. Emma's eyelids fluttered occasionally, and her fingers seemed to respond to Kate's gentle squeezes with the faintest pressure. Dr. Martinez cautioned them not to read too much into these small movements, explaining that the brain often showed signs of activity during the emergence from sedation that didn't necessarily indicate conscious awareness. But for Kate, each tiny response felt like a victory against the darkness that had enveloped their lives. William noticed how Kate had transformed during these days of vigil. The woman who had once accused him of being emotionally distant during their marriage now demonstrated a fierce maternal devotion that both impressed and humbled him. She had memorized the schedule of every nurse, learned the purpose of each medication, and could interpret the monitors almost as well as the medical staff. Her dedication to Emma was absolute, unwavering, and slightly frightening in its intensity. The hospital had become their entire world, a sterile universe with its own rhythms and rules. They knew which vending machine had the freshest coffee, which bathroom was always clean, and which hallway offered the best view of the outside world. Kate had claimed the chair closest to Emma's bed as her own, and even the most authoritative nurses seemed to understand that she would not be moved from that spot unless absolutely necessary. Michael visited for the first time on the third day, accompanied by Kate's mother. The 7-year-old boy stood in the doorway of the ICU room, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Emma had always been his playmate, his partner in childhood adventures, and seeing her surrounded by machines and tubes clearly overwhelmed him. Kate knelt down to his level, trying to explain in simple terms what had happened to his sister, but Michael's questions revealed the depth of his confusion. "Is Emma going to die like Grandpa Joe?" he asked with the brutal honesty that only children possessed. Kate felt her throat close up, unable to formulate an answer that was both truthful and comforting. William stepped in, lifting Michael onto his lap and explaining that the doctors were working very hard to make Emma better, that sometimes people needed special machines to help them heal, and that Emma knew how much they all loved her even while she was sleeping. The visit was brief but important. Michael left one of his favorite toy cars on Emma's bedside table, explaining to his unconscious sister that she could play with it when she woke up. The gesture was so innocent and hopeful that Kate had to excuse herself to cry in the bathroom, overwhelmed by the pure faith of a child who couldn't imagine a world where his sister might not recover completely. Kate's mother, Margaret, proved to be an unexpected source of strength during this crisis. She had always been somewhat critical of Kate's parenting choices, offering unsolicited advice and subtle criticisms that strained their relationship. But now, faced with her granddaughter's condition, Margaret became a pillar of practical support. She organized meal deliveries, coordinated with friends and family members who wanted to help, and handled all the mundane tasks that Kate couldn't focus on. The emotional toll of the constant vigilance was beginning to show on both Kate and William. They moved through the hospital corridors like zombies, surviving on caffeine and adrenaline, their faces gaunt with exhaustion and worry. The nursing staff had begun to watch them with concern, recognizing the signs of caregivers who were pushing themselves beyond healthy limits. Patricia, Emma's primary nurse, gently suggested that they consider taking shifts, allowing each other time to rest properly. "Your daughter is going to need strong, healthy parents when she wakes up," Patricia said with the wisdom of someone who had guided many families through similar crises. "You can't take care of her if you don't take care of yourselves." The advice was sound, but neither Kate nor William could bring themselves to leave for more than an hour at a time. The fear that something might change during their absence, that Emma might wake up calling for them and find only strangers, kept them tethered to the ICU with invisible chains of parental anxiety. On the third evening, Dr. Martinez announced that they would begin reducing Emma's sedation the following morning, allowing her to gradually emerge from the medically induced coma. The news should have been encouraging, but it filled Kate with a new kind of terror. What if Emma woke up changed? What if the surgery had affected her personality, her memories, her essential self? The uncertainty was almost worse than the waiting. William found Kate standing in the hospital chapel at midnight, not praying exactly, but seeking some kind of solace in the quiet space. He wasn't particularly religious, and neither was Kate, but the chapel offered something that the rest of the hospital couldn't: a sense of peace removed from the constant medical urgency. They sat together in the back pew, not speaking, just sharing the weight of their fears in the dim candlelight. "I keep thinking about all the things I could have done differently," Kate whispered finally, her voice barely audible in the sacred silence. "Maybe if I had noticed something earlier, if I had taken her to the doctor when she complained about headaches last month, if I had been more attentive." William turned to look at her, seeing the guilt that was eating away at her from the inside. The doctor said this type of hemorrhage can happen to anyone at any time. There were no warning signs, no way to predict it. "You're a good mother, Kate. You've always been a good mother." The words seemed to release something in Kate, and she began to cry again, but these tears felt different, cleaner somehow, as if she was finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her terror, instead of trying to stay strong for everyone else. William hesitated for a moment, then pulled her into his arms, holding her while she sobbed against his chest. It was the first time they had embraced since their divorce, and the familiarity of it was both comforting and painful. They stayed in the chapel for nearly an hour, talking quietly about Emma's future, about their fears and hopes, about the strange way this crisis had stripped away all the anger and resentment between them. They were no longer ex-spouses locked in a bitter divorce battle. They were simply two people who loved the same child and would do anything to see her healthy and whole again. When they returned to the ICU, Emma seemed to be resting more peacefully, her breathing slightly less dependent on the ventilator. Kate resumed her position in the bedside chair while William settled into the family lounge, both of them preparing for what might be the most important day of their lives. Tomorrow they would learn whether their daughter would return to them unchanged, or whether this crisis would mark the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter in all their lives. The night stretched ahead of them, filled with the familiar sounds of the hospital and the weight of anticipation. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm, but inside the ICU, time seemed suspended, waiting for a little girl to open her eyes and show them what kind of future they would face together. The morning of the fourth day arrived with the sterile efficiency that characterized all hospital dawns. Kate had spent another sleepless night in the chair beside Emma's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her daughter's chest and the steady parade of numbers across the monitoring screens. William found her there at sunrise, her hand still clasped around Emma's small fingers, her eyes red-rimmed but alert with nervous anticipation. Dr. Martinez appeared earlier than usual, accompanied by a neurologist named Dr. Chen and two ICU nurses. The assembled medical team spoke in quiet, professional tones as they reviewed Emma's charts and discussed the process of reducing her sedation. Kate felt her stomach twist with anxiety as she listened to their clinical conversation about medication levels and expected responses. This was the moment they had been waiting for, yet now that it had arrived, she found herself terrified of what they might discover. "We'll reduce the sedation gradually over the next several hours," Dr. Martinez explained to Kate and William. "Emma may show signs of consciousness slowly, or she might emerge more quickly. Every patient responds differently. It's important to remain calm and speak to her normally if she begins to wake up. Familiar voices can be very comforting during this transition." The process began with almost anticlimactic simplicity. A nurse adjusted one of the IV medications, making a small notation on Emma's chart. Nothing happened immediately, and Kate found herself staring at the monitors as if she could will them to show signs of improvement. The numbers remained steady, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, Emma's breathing began to shift from the mechanical rhythm imposed by the ventilator to something more natural and self-directed. William positioned himself on the opposite side of Emma's bed, creating a circle of parental presence around their daughter. They began talking to her in the way that had become natural over the past few days. Kate sharing stories about home, William reading from her favorite books, both of them maintaining a steady stream of familiar voices that might guide her back to consciousness. The first real sign came at midday, when Emma's eyes began to flutter more purposefully, not the random movements they had witnessed before, but deliberate attempts to open them. Kate leaned forward, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. "Emma, sweetheart, can you hear me? It's Mommy. Daddy's here too." Emma's eyelids opened slowly, revealing confused brown eyes that seemed to search the room without focusing on anything in particular. She appeared to be looking through them rather than at them, her gaze unfocused and distant. Kate felt a moment of panic. Was this what they had feared? Had the surgery left Emma somehow disconnected from the world around her? Dr. Chen stepped forward with a small flashlight, gently checking Emma's pupil responses while explaining that confusion was completely normal during emergence from sedation. "Her brain is essentially rebooting," he said with a reassuring smile. "It may take some time for her to fully recognize where she is and what's happened." Over the next few hours, Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes seeming alert and aware, other times falling back into deep sleep. When she was awake, she appeared frightened and confused by her surroundings. The tubes and machines that had sustained her life now seemed to terrify her, and she made weak attempts to pull at the various medical devices attached to her body. Kate found herself in the agonizing position of trying to comfort a daughter who didn't seem to recognize her. Emma's eyes would focus on Kate's face with a mixture of confusion and fear, as if she was looking at a stranger. When Kate spoke, Emma didn't respond with the usual bright recognition that had always characterized their relationship. Instead, she seemed to retreat further into herself. Overwhelmed by stimuli she couldn't process or understand, the medical team assured them that this disorientation was typical, but Kate felt each moment of non-recognition like a physical blow. This was her baby, the child who had never met a stranger, who chattered constantly about everything she observed, who had always run to Kate for comfort when she was frightened or hurt. Now Emma looked at her with the blank stare of someone trying to solve a puzzle without having all the pieces. William struggled with his own demons as he watched Emma's confused attempts to make sense of her surroundings. He had always been Emma's weekend adventure companion, the parent who encouraged her to climb higher, run faster, and explore the world with fearless enthusiasm. Seeing her now, vulnerable and frightened, filled him with a guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. Had his encouragement of her active lifestyle somehow contributed to this tragedy? The rational part of his mind knew this was impossible, but grief and fear rarely listened to logic. As evening approached, Emma began to show signs of greater awareness. She was able to track movement with her eyes and seemed to recognize familiar voices, even if she couldn't yet respond appropriately. When Kate sang a lullaby that had been part of Emma's bedtime routine since infancy, Emma's expression softened slightly, and her breathing became more relaxed. It was the first indication that somewhere inside her confused and healing mind, their daughter was still present. The nursing staff had warned them that recovery from brain surgery was rarely linear. Emma might have good hours followed by setbacks, moments of clarity followed by confusion. They emphasized the importance of patience and consistency, of maintaining a calm, supportive presence even when Emma seemed not to recognize them or respond to their efforts to connect with her. That night, Kate refused to leave Emma's bedside even for a moment. She had seen a glimpse of her daughter returning, and she was determined to be there for every small step of progress. William brought dinner from the cafeteria, but Kate barely touched the food, too focused on watching Emma's face for signs of further improvement. The real breakthrough came just before midnight, when Emma suddenly turned her head toward Kate and whispered a single word. "Mommy." The word was weak and slurred, but it was unmistakably intentional, unmistakably directed at Kate. The recognition in Emma's eyes was brief but genuine, a flash of the bright, intelligent child they knew and loved. Kate burst into tears of relief and joy, carefully leaning down to kiss Emma's forehead while being mindful of the medical equipment still surrounding her. "Yes, baby, it's Mommy. I'm right here. Daddy's here too. We've been waiting for you." William felt his own eyes fill with tears as he witnessed this first real connection between mother and daughter since the surgery. It was a small moment, lasting only seconds before Emma drifted back into sleep, but it represented everything they had been hoping and praying for. Their daughter was still there, still fighting to return to them. The medical team was cautiously optimistic about this development. Dr. Martinez explained that recognition of family members was an excellent sign, indicating that Emma's memory and cognitive functions were beginning to come back online. However, she cautioned them that recovery would likely be a long process, potentially involving weeks or months of rehabilitation and therapy. Kate didn't care about the timeline. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt genuine hope. Emma had recognized her, had called her Mommy, had looked at her with love instead of confusion. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, one small victory at a time. The worst was behind them now. Everything else was just a matter of patience, determination, and the unbreakable bonds of family love. The fifth day marked the beginning of what Dr. Martinez called the real work of recovery. Emma was awake for longer periods now, though she tired easily and often seemed overwhelmed by the simplest interactions. Her speech was slow and sometimes garbled, and she struggled to find words that had once come easily to her. When she tried to tell Kate about being thirsty, she said watermouth want instead of forming complete sentences, a regression that both heartened and worried her parents. Kate had to learn a new kind of patience, one that allowed for the gradual rebuilding of communication between mother and daughter. Emma would start to say something, then stop mid-sentence with a frustrated expression, as if the words had simply vanished from her mind. Sometimes she would point at objects and look expectantly at Kate, clearly wanting something but unable to express what it was. These moments required Kate to become a detective, interpreting gestures and expressions to understand Emma's needs. William watched Kate navigate these challenges with growing admiration. During their marriage, he had often criticized what he saw as Kate's overprotective tendencies, her habit of anticipating Emma's needs before the child could express them herself. Now he realized that this intimate knowledge of their daughter was exactly what Emma needed for her recovery. Kate could read Emma's moods and desires with an accuracy that amazed the medical staff. The physical therapy began on the 5th day, starting with simple exercises designed to assess Emma's motor functions. A cheerful therapist named Lisa worked with Emma to move her arms and legs, testing her coordination and strength. Emma's left side was noticeably weaker than her right, and she struggled with tasks that had once been automatic, like gripping objects or raising her arm above her head. The sight of her daughter working so hard to accomplish movements that had once been effortless brought fresh tears to Kate's eyes. "She's remarkably determined," Lisa observed as Emma attempted to squeeze a rubber ball with her left hand. "Some children become discouraged easily after brain surgery, but Emma seems motivated to work hard. That's going to be crucial for her recovery." Emma's determination was indeed remarkable, but it came with its own challenges. She became frustrated quickly when her body wouldn't cooperate with her intentions, sometimes crying or pushing away the therapy equipment when exercises proved too difficult. Kate learned to recognize the signs of impending meltdowns and developed strategies to help Emma through these moments of overwhelming frustration. The cognitive assessments revealed a mixed picture of damage and preservation. Emma could remember her family members and basic facts about her life, but her short-term memory was significantly impacted. She might ask for a drink of water, receive it, and then ask again 5 minutes later with no memory of the previous request. She had difficulty following multi-step instructions and seemed confused by concepts that had been well within her grasp before the surgery. Dr. Chen, the neurologist, explained that this type of cognitive disruption was common after brain surgery, especially in the areas that had been affected by Emma's hemorrhage. "The brain is remarkably plastic, especially in children," he assured Kate and William. "With time and proper therapy, many of these functions can be retrained or compensated for through other neural pathways." The speech therapist, Maria, worked with Emma on basic communication skills that seemed almost insulting for a child who had been reading chapter books just days earlier. They practiced identifying colors, naming objects, and forming simple sentences. Emma approached these exercises with the same determination she showed in physical therapy. But Kate could see the confusion in her daughter's eyes when she struggled with tasks that should have been easy. William found himself struggling with his own emotions as he watched Emma work through these basic exercises. The child who had once narrated elaborate fantasy stories during their weekend adventures now couldn't remember the names of common household objects. She looked at a picture of a bicycle and called it the riding thing, clearly knowing what it was but unable to access the specific word. These small losses accumulated in William's heart like paper cuts, each one minor but collectively devastating. The social worker, Janet, visited again to discuss long-term care plans. Emma would likely need intensive rehabilitation services for months, possibly years. There would be occupational therapy to help her relearn daily living skills, continued speech therapy to restore her communication abilities, and cognitive therapy to address the memory and processing issues. The insurance company was already pushing for Emma to be moved to a rehabilitation facility, arguing that the acute care phase of her treatment was complete. Kate felt overwhelmed by the maze of decisions and logistics that suddenly defined their lives. She had to coordinate with multiple therapy departments, learn about different rehabilitation facilities, and somehow manage this complex medical journey while still being a mother to both Emma and Michael. The simple routines of their previous life, school pickups, bedtime stories, weekend soccer games, seemed like luxuries from a different world. Emma's personality began to emerge more clearly as she became more alert and engaged. She was still fundamentally the same child, but with some notable changes. She was more easily frustrated than before, more prone to emotional outbursts when things didn't go as expected. She also seemed more anxious, clinging to Kate with an intensity that was both touching and concerning. The confident, independent little girl who had fearlessly climbed jungle gyms now seemed afraid to let her mother out of sight. The hospital room had become a strange sort of home, decorated with get-well cards from Emma's classmates and filled with familiar objects brought from home to comfort her. Emma's stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, rarely left her side, and she would often have conversations with the toy when she couldn't find the words to communicate with the adults around her. These one-sided conversations revealed glimpses of Emma's inner world as she processed what had happened to her. "Mr. Hoppy scared," she would whisper to the stuffed animal. "Head hurt. Mommy stay. No go away." Kate began to understand that Emma's recovery wasn't just physical and cognitive, it was also emotional. Her daughter was working through trauma that she didn't fully understand, trying to make sense of why her body had betrayed her and why she was surrounded by strangers who poked and prodded her every day. The trust and security that had been the foundation of Emma's world had been shaken, and rebuilding that sense of safety would be as important as regaining her physical abilities. The evening of the 5th day brought a small but significant victory. Emma managed to say her first complete sentence since waking up. "I want to go home with Mommy and Daddy." The words were slow and carefully formed, and she looked proud of herself for managing to express such a complex thought. Kate and William exchanged a look of hope and determination. Home was exactly where they all wanted to be, and they would do whatever it took to get there together. 2 weeks had passed since Emma's surgery, and the hospital had become an unwelcome second home for the family. Kate had lost 15 pounds from stress and irregular eating, her clothes hanging loose on her frame like borrowed garments. William had extended his leave of absence indefinitely, delegating his business responsibilities to colleagues who understood that some things mattered more than quarterly reports and client meetings. Their lives had been completely reorganized around Emma's recovery, and both parents were discovering reserves of strength and patience they hadn't known they possessed. Emma's progress was measured in small victories that would have seemed insignificant in the before times but now felt like major triumphs. She could walk short distances with assistance, though her left leg remained weak and unsteady. Her vocabulary was slowly returning, though she sometimes substituted words in ways that were both endearing and heartbreaking. She called the physical therapist the moving lady and referred to her medications as the make better juice. These linguistic approximations showed that her mind was working to bridge the gaps created by her injury, finding creative workarounds when precise words remained elusive. The decision about where Emma would continue her rehabilitation had become a source of tension between Kate and the medical team. The doctors recommended a specialized pediatric rehabilitation facility about an hour from their home, where Emma could receive intensive therapy in a setting designed specifically for children recovering from brain injuries. Kate, however, was reluctant to move Emma from the hospital where they had developed relationships with the staff and where she felt some measure of control over her daughter's care. She needs her family right now more than she needs specialized facilities, Kate argued during a care conference with Dr. Martinez and the rehabilitation team. Moving her to another place, with new people and new routines, will just add more stress to what she's already going through. William found himself caught between Kate's protective instincts and the medical professionals' recommendations. He could see the wisdom in both positions. Emma clearly needed intensive rehabilitation services, but she also needed the security and comfort that came from familiar faces and consistent caregivers. The decision felt enormous, as if choosing the wrong path might somehow compromise Emma's recovery. Emma herself seemed unaware of these adult deliberations. She was focused on the immediate challenges of relearning basic skills and managing the fatigue that still overwhelmed her after even mild exertion. Her days were filled with therapy sessions that she approached with a mixture of determination and frustration. She wanted to please the therapists and make her parents proud, but her body and mind often refused to cooperate with her intentions. Michael visited more regularly now, bringing drawings he had made for Emma and updates about school and friends. The 7-year-old was struggling to understand why his sister was so different now, why she couldn't play their usual games or remember things they had talked about just days earlier. During one visit, he asked Emma if she remembered their secret hiding place in the backyard, and when she looked at him blankly, his face crumpled with disappointment. "She forgot our secret place," he whispered to Kate later, his voice full of confused sadness. "Why did she forget, Mommy? Will she remember if I tell her about it again?" Kate knelt down to Michael's level, trying to explain in terms he could understand. Emma's brain got hurt, and sometimes when that happens, people forget things for a while. But the doctors are helping her remember, and we're going to help too. Some things might take longer to come back than others, but the important thing is that Emma still loves you just as much as before. The conversation reminded Kate of all the family dynamics that would need to be rebuilt as Emma recovered. Michael had always looked up to his older sister, following her lead in games and adventures. Now he was watching her struggle with tasks he could easily accomplish, and the confusion in his young mind was palpable. Kate realized that Emma's recovery would require the entire family to adapt and find new ways of relating to each other. Kate's relationship with William had evolved in unexpected ways during this crisis. The anger and resentment from their divorce had been set aside, replaced by a focused collaboration centered on Emma's needs. They made decisions together, shared information with medical staff jointly, and supported each other through the most difficult moments. It wasn't a romantic reconciliation. Too much had happened between them for that, but it was a partnership based on shared love for their children and mutual respect for each other's devotion as parents. "You've been amazing through all of this," William told Kate one evening as they sat in the family lounge after Emma had fallen asleep. "I know I didn't always appreciate how much you did for the kids when we were married, but seeing you now, Emma's lucky to have you as her mother." Kate felt tears spring to her eyes at the unexpected acknowledgement. During their marriage, she had often felt that William took her parenting for granted, that he saw her dedication to the children as somehow natural and effortless, rather than the result of conscious choice and hard work. Hearing him recognize her efforts now meant more than she had expected. The daily routine of hospital life had become familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. Morning rounds with the medical team, followed by physical therapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapy sessions. Lunch was always a challenge, as Emma's appetite remained poor, and she often forgot to eat unless constantly reminded. Afternoons brought quieter activities, reading together, working on simple puzzles, or just talking about anything Emma wanted to discuss. Emma's artistic abilities seemed largely preserved, though her fine motor control made drawing more difficult than before. She could still conceptualize pictures and had clear ideas about what she wanted to create, but her hands struggled to execute her artistic vision. This led to frequent frustrations, with Emma sometimes throwing down crayons or markers when the show results didn't match her intentions. Kate began to see that recovery wasn't just about regaining lost abilities. It was also about accepting limitations and finding new ways to accomplish goals. Emma would need to learn patience with herself, to celebrate small improvements rather than focusing on what she couldn't yet do. This lesson was as much for the adults as for Emma herself. Kate had to resist the urge to do things for Emma that she could struggle through herself, learning when to offer help and when to let her daughter work through challenges independently. The financial implications of Emma's care were beginning to become clear, and they were staggering. Even with insurance, the costs of extended rehabilitation, ongoing therapies, and potential modifications to their home would strain both Kate's and William's resources. They would need to sell assets, possibly relocate to be closer to specialized services, and reorganize their entire financial future around Emma's needs. But these concerns felt secondary to the immediate goal of Emma's recovery. Money could be earned again. Their daughter's health and happiness were irreplaceable. As the second week in the hospital drew to a close, Emma achieved another significant milestone. She walked the entire length of the hospital corridor without assistance, albeit slowly and with some wobbling. The accomplishment was small in objective terms, but for Emma and her family, it represented a giant step toward independence and normalcy. Kate walked beside her daughter, ready to catch her if she stumbled, while William recorded the moment on his phone, capturing Emma's proud smile as she reached the end of the hallway. "I did it," Emma announced, slightly out of breath but beaming with satisfaction. "I walked all by myself." The joy in her voice reminded Kate of the little girl who had celebrated every small achievement with enthusiasm and pride. That essential spark, that core of Emma's personality that made her who she was, had survived the surgery and the trauma. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, building on these small victories until Emma could reclaim her place in the world. 6 months later, Kate stood in the doorway of Emma's new bedroom, watching her daughter carefully arrange her collection of stuffed animals on the specially modified bed. The room had been redesigned with Emma's current needs in mind: grab bars in strategic locations, non-slip surfaces, and lighting that could be easily controlled. It looked different from Emma's old room, more clinical perhaps, but it was undeniably home. Emma moved slowly but deliberately, her left hand still weaker than her right, but functional enough for most daily tasks. She had graduated from the rehabilitation facility after 3 months of intensive therapy, though she continued with outpatient sessions 3 times a week. The progress had been remarkable yet incomplete. Emma was recognizably herself again, but with subtle changes that reminded them daily of their journey through crisis and recovery. "Mommy, can you help me reach Mr. Hoppy?" Emma asked, pointing to her beloved stuffed rabbit that had fallen behind the bed. Her speech was clearer now, though she still spoke more slowly than before and sometimes paused to search for the right word. Kate retrieved the toy, noting how Emma's face lit up with the same joy she had always shown when reunited with her favorite companion. The house felt different now, reorganized around Emma's needs and the new rhythms of their life. William had moved back in temporarily when Emma was discharged from the rehabilitation facility, and somehow the temporary arrangement had become permanent. They weren't romantically reconciled. Too much had changed for them to simply resume their marriage. But they had found a new way of being family together, united by their shared commitment to Emma's continued recovery. Michael had adjusted to the changes better than anyone had expected. He had become protective of his sister in ways that were both touching and occasionally problematic. He would hover nearby during Emma's homework sessions, ready to help her remember words or complete tasks that frustrated her. Sometimes his eagerness to assist robbed Emma of the independence she was working so hard to rebuild, leading to conflicts that required careful parental navigation. "I can do it myself," Emma would insist when Michael tried to help her with tasks she was capable of completing alone. The determination in her voice reminded Kate of the strong-willed child Emma had always been, and she took these moments of assertiveness as positive signs that Emma's core personality remained intact. School had been the biggest challenge. Emma had returned to her regular elementary school after months of home tutoring, but with significant accommodations. She had an aide who helped her navigate the building and manage her schoolwork, and her teachers had been trained to understand her cognitive changes. Emma could still read, though more slowly than before, and her mathematical abilities had been largely preserved. However, her short-term memory issues made it difficult for her to follow complex instructions or remember homework assignments without constant reminders. Her classmates had welcomed her back with enthusiasm, though Kate noticed that some of the social dynamics had shifted. Emma tired more easily now and couldn't always keep up with the fast-paced conversations and activities that had once come naturally to her. Some friendships had deepened through the crisis, with children showing remarkable empathy and patience. Others had faded as the reality of Emma's changes became apparent. Kate tried not to take these losses personally, understanding that 8-year-olds couldn't be expected to fully comprehend the implications of brain injury. The most difficult aspect of Emma's recovery had been helping her understand and accept her own limitations. There were still days when she became frustrated with her slower processing speed or her difficulty remembering things that should have been automatic. She would sometimes cry and ask why this had happened to her, questions that Kate answered as honestly as possible, while trying to maintain hope for continued improvement. "Some brains just get sick sometimes, like when you catch a cold," Kate explained during one of these conversations. "But just like your body got better from the cold, your brain is getting better too. It just takes longer, and we have to be patient with it." Emma had developed new interests during her recovery, partly because some of her old activities were no longer possible, and partly because her changed perspective had shifted her priorities. She had become fascinated with art therapy, creating paintings and drawings that expressed emotions she couldn't always put into words. Her artwork revealed a depth of feeling and understanding that sometimes surprised the adults around her. One painting showed a small figure surrounded by larger, protective shapes and warm colors, a visual representation of how she experienced her family's love and support. William had made significant changes to his career, taking a position with less travel and more flexibility. He had realized during Emma's crisis that his previous priorities had been misaligned, that success in business meant nothing if he missed the important moments of his children's lives. His relationship with both Emma and Michael had deepened during the months of recovery, and he was determined not to let work demands interfere with his presence as a father. Kate had also transformed during this journey, discovering strengths she hadn't known she possessed and developing a deeper understanding of what truly mattered in life. She had become an advocate not just for Emma, but for other families navigating similar challenges, volunteering with a support group for parents of children with brain injuries. Sharing their story had helped other families feel less alone, and it had given meaning to their difficult journey. The medical team continued to be cautiously optimistic about Emma's long-term prognosis. Dr. Martinez had explained that the brain's plasticity meant that recovery could continue for years, especially in children. Emma might regain more function, develop compensatory strategies for her remaining challenges, or simply learn to live successfully with her current abilities. The key was maintaining realistic expectations while staying open to possibilities. Emma's resilience continued to amaze everyone who knew her. She approached her ongoing challenges with a matter-of-fact acceptance that sometimes seemed beyond her years. When asked about her surgery and recovery, she would explain matter-of-factly that her brain had gotten sick, but was getting better, and that the doctors and therapists were helping her learn how to do things again. "I'm different now, but I'm still me," she had told her grandmother during a recent visit, a statement that captured the essence of her journey with remarkable clarity. The family had established new traditions that accommodated Emma's current abilities while celebrating their unity. Sunday afternoon art sessions had replaced some of their more physically demanding activities. Reading time had become more collaborative, with family members taking turns with different voices for characters. Movie nights featured films chosen specifically for their positive messages and emotional accessibility. Kate often reflected on the night she had sat in the hospital chapel, overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty about Emma's future. The reality of their current life was different from what she had imagined then, more complicated in some ways, but also richer in unexpected moments of grace and connection. Emma's injury had forced them all to slow down, to pay attention to details they might have otherwise missed, to appreciate small victories that healthy families took for granted. As Kate tucked Emma into bed that evening, listening to her daughter's prayers that now included gratitude for her therapists and hopes for continued healing, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was still grief for the carefree childhood that Emma had lost, worry about future challenges, and occasional anger at the randomness of the crisis that had changed their lives. But there was also profound gratitude for Emma's survival, pride in her determination, and amazement at the strength their family had discovered. Together, Emma's recovery had taught them all that healing was not just about returning to a previous state, but about finding new ways to thrive despite changed circumstances. Their journey was far from over, but they had learned to measure progress in small steps, to celebrate resilience over perfection, and to understand that love could transform even the most difficult challenges into opportunities for growth and connection. Emma's sorrow had indeed hung in the air during those terrible days in the hospital, and William had felt every bit of her pain. But they had learned together that sorrow could coexist with hope, that pain could lead to deeper understanding, and that families could emerge from crisis not broken but transformed, bound together by shared strength and unwavering love.